She left behind her car, her phone, and a toy that didn't belong to her, then vanished into a swamp no one ever comes back from. Julia Ward, a 29-year-old black social worker from Savannah, Georgia, disappeared without a single clear trace. Her gray Civic was found parked quietly on the roadside near the Okefenokee Swamp, a place locals grimly call the Hollow Zone, known for the chilling stories that haunt its history. Inside the car, her phone still lit up with the map app open, her wallet untouched, and but, puzzling of all, a child's toy no one in her family could identify. No cameras, no witnesses, just mud, thick woods, and the sound of the wind howling from the south. Before everything went silent, Julia Mays was a vital part of a small, tight-knit community called Maple Ridge, the kind of southern Georgia town where folks still greet each other with a nod and hold the door open at the grocery store. Julia wasn't rich or famous, but one thing nearly everyone agreed on: she made people feel heard. At 32, Julia was a single mom to 6-year-old Amari, an bright-eyed little girl whose braids were always neatly done each morning. Julia worked part-time as a patient coordinator at the local clinic. Outside of work hours, she ran a blog focused on mental health in the Black community, a topic that was still considered taboo in places like Maple Ridge. Her posts were simple yet bold, sharing stories about solo motherhood, surviving an economy that wasn't built for people like her, and the kind of loneliness that no one talks about. Neighbors described Julia as the kind of person who always asked if you were okay, but rarely said much about herself. She volunteered often, cooking for the shelter, running writing workshops for teens. But no one really knew why she'd moved to Maples Ridge 4 years earlier. She had no family there, and when asked, she'd simply smile and say, "Some places just call your name." It wasn't until Julia vanished that people began noticing the gaps in what they thought was a full story, like the fact that she never talked about her life before Amari, or how she never posted family photos online, only pictures of her daughter. And then came the question, was there a part of us, Julia's life, that she'd been hiding all along? On the morning she disappeared, neighbors still saw her walk Amari to the school bus. Just like every day, she wore her earth-toned sweater, hair wrapped in a scarf, and carried her usual paper coffee cup. She kissed her daughter on the forehead before turning back, just like always. Except this time, she didn't have her handbag. That was strange. Julia was the kind of person who always came prepared. Her trunk always had allergy meds, bandages, and extra clothes for Amari. But that morning, her hands were empty. After dropping off Amari, Julia never returned home. A gas station clerk a few blocks away recalled seeing her at the pump, just standing there, silent, like she was battling something inside. Surveillance footage later showed her driving toward the road that leads to the swamp, a remote stretch she never usually took. And after that, she was never seen again. The first person to notice something was off was Amari's teacher when Julia didn't show up for pickup that afternoon. Within hours, panic spread through town. Friends, coworkers, neighbors, everyone started calling, texting, searching. But all they found was silence. Her phone rang, but when unanswered, her house was locked, her car was gone. And Amari, that little girl, sat waiting in the school office, eyes red from crying, still believing her mama was just running late, not gone. People started asking, had anyone really listened to Julia? She always listened to others, but had anyone ever asked what she needed? Why would someone so devoted to her child, so cautious and prepared, just vanish without a trace? Or maybe that was the trace, the sudden silence of someone who was always there. Amari was taken in by Julia's close friend, Lorna, a nurse who once trained with her in first aid. In Julia's small bedroom, the first clues appeared, quiet but haunting. Her closet was tidy. A backup phone was charging, and on the desk lay a notebook with plans for a beach trip she'd promised Amari. A mother getting ready for a vacation doesn't just disappear like she never existed. While police collected witness statements and checked traffic cameras around Maple Ridge, Lorna, Julia's best friend, was the first to admit something out loud. I think Julia was hiding a part of her life she didn't want anyone to know about. At first, no one wanted to believe. Julia was so honest, so responsible, so grounded. But then Lorna shared something she'd kept secret for years, not out of suspicion, but because she'd promised never to speak of it. 3 years earlier, during a night shift at the Boston ER, Julia had called Lorna close to midnight. Her voice was a whisper. "Someone's looking for me. If I disappear, tell Amari I never left her." Julia deleted the call right after. The next day, she acted like nothing had happened. Lorna never brought it up again, assuming it was just a moment of panic. But now, it felt like a forgotten prophecy. The deeper they looked, the more strange things surfaced. A bank worker recalled Julia once withdrawing her entire savings, then redepositing it days later. Someone from the single mom support group said Julia had once asked about witness protection laws, then brushed it off, saying it was research for a blog. Each detail meant little on its own, but together they painted a picture no one had seen. Eventually, police found her car, parked quietly, on the edge of the Okefenokee Swamp near an old trail locals call Fog Path. The door was unlocked. Inside, a water bottle labeled Annika, her phone, still open to a map app, and a small doll, one that didn't belong to Amari. On the back seat, a faint, muddy footprint, small, like a child had been there, and left before sunrise. One discovery froze the entire investigative team. Julia's phone had no calls after 9:14 a.m. Exact time she left the gas station. But GPS data showed movement. Someone, maybe Julia, navigating toward a remote part of the swamp. No cell signal, no cameras. Just a path cutting through flooded forest where locals say even a scream can disappear in seconds. The first 48 hours after Julia vanished passed, like a heavy, sleepless dream. No answered calls, no bank activity, no phone signal, no credit card swipes. The Pierce County Sheriff's Office launched an official investigation, but they quickly realized they were staring at a disappearance with no clear beginning. There were no signs of abduction, no signs of a struggle, no blood, no tire marks, just absence. The car had been left as if its driver had only stepped away for a moment and would be right back. But Julia didn't come back. A week later, volunteer search teams made up of locals and rescue organizations began combing through the swamp near where her car was found. It was hostile terrain, a dense network of wild forest paths, deep blackwater creeks, and mud that Testitat could swallow a grown person in under 10 seconds. Elders in the area have long said Okefenokee is a place that doesn't keep promises, only secrets. On the third day of searching, a volunteer named Marcus, a retired high school teacher, spotted a small, damp piece of paper snagged on a low-hanging branch near the water's edge. The ink was smeared, but one line was still legible. "Tell Amari I didn't forget her. Birthday." The handwriting was shaky, rushed. The paper didn't appear torn from a notebook. No signature. No way to know for sure who wrote it. But that one line was enough to bring the entire search to a standstill. When asked, Amari quietly confirmed her birthday was next week, March 18th. Julia had promised a small picnic near the old churchyard under the same willow trees where they used to sit together. For a 6-year-old, that promise was everything. And now, that soaked scrap of paper became the only proof that Julia, or someone who knew her, well, had been in those woods after she vanished. Police collected the note, sent it for handwriting, and DNA analysis. The results came back inconclusive. Not enough DNA to match. Not enough writing to confirm authorship. All they had left was intuition and the aching certainty of a child. "That's how my mom writes," Amari whispered, clutching the same doll Julia had, given her 2 years before. No officer in the room had the heart to contradict her. Not because they were sure, but because they couldn't deny the pain in her voice or the truth in her eyes. Eyes that looked like someone who had just lost part of her heart. In the days that followed, Julia's disappearance began to spread far beyond Maple Ridge. Social media posts bearing the hashtag #Find Julia Mays circulated quickly, drawing attention from national organizations that support missing Black women, groups that knew all too well the sting of being overlooked. Public pressure mounted, and the Pierce County Sheriff's Office expanded the investigation, assigning a task force for missing adults. But the deeper they dug, the stranger it became. Julia had left behind no digital trail after that morning. No social media logins, no phone calls, no cell signal pings within 30 miles. It was as if she had evaporated. One strange detail emerged from a security camera at a small electronics store 7 miles from where the car was found. At 10:12 a.m., the day Julia vanished, footage showed a black SUV with partially obscured plates turning onto an unmarked dirt road that led into the forest, heading in the same direction as Julia's last known location. Police couldn't identify the driver, but there was something odd. A long scratch ran along the passenger side, like it had scraped past thorn, bushes, or a wire fence. That same vehicle type matched a previous report, an unidentified SUV seen idling near Amari's elementary school 2 weeks earlier. But since no suspicious behavior was noted at the time, it was never followed up. Meanwhile, another potential clue surfaced. The search team found a dark blue cotton headscarf snagged on a branch near a fast-moving bend in the Kill River. No blood, but one corner was stained with dark mud and carried a sharp chemical odor, not typical swamp mud, but the kind of smell found near old chemical treatment sites. Lab analysis later detected faint traces of sodium hypochlorite, a compound commonly used in hospitals and industrial laundry facilities. A new theory began to form. What if Julia had been taken to a place that used to be a medical or industrial site, somewhere no one thought was still in use? That detail led to an unexpected discovery. An old county map from 1992 listed a private rehab facility called Brookhaven Renewal, once located on the eastern edge of the swamp, right near the Okefenokee border. The center had been shut down over 15 years ago, amid allegations of patient mistreatment. The main building was still standing, but the property was no longer listed in county public records. When search teams tried to approach the site, they were stopped by barbed wire fencing and a sign that read, "Private property, no trespassing." No one seemed to know who currently owned the land, and with that, a quiet question began to grow, louder. If someone had a reason to keep Julia alive and hidden, then this place, with its thick walls and long-forgotten silence, might be exactly where they'd start. The discovery of the old Brookhaven renewal map and the silence surrounding it threw the entire town of Maple Ridge into confusion. No one remembered the facility. No signage, no current property records, no one knew who owned it. But what made things even stranger was what happened when investigators began re-questioning witnesses people had assumed were certain. The gas station clerk, the one who claimed to have seen Julia that morning, changed his statement during a second interview. "I saw a black woman," he said, "hair up, wearing a brown sweater. Looked like her, but I can't be 100% sure." The station's camera had been broken that week, something that initially seemed like a coincidence but now felt suspicious. Investigators reminded him, "You told the press. You were sure it was her." He just shrugged. "I thought I was helping." Then came a completely different account from Gloria, a 64-year-old woman living in a mobile home about 2 miles from where the car was found. "I heard a car around midday. Sounded like a fight. A door slammed hard, then a woman screamed. Wednesday, dog says. Asked why she didn't call it in at the time. She answered, I thought it was kids messing around. But now, I'm not so sure that was a game, Besides, Julia's closest friend. Lorna was pulled back in for more questioning. Investigators had recovered a backup of a text message Julia sent her 2 weeks before disappearing. It read, "If something happens to me, don't let them say it was my fault." At the time, it seemed vague, but now it felt like a voice calling out from the dark. When asked what Julia meant, Lorna just shook her head. I think Julia had been through something before Maple Ridge. She once told me, everywhere you go, there's someone trying to trap somebody. They just use different excuses. But I never asked for details. What started as a simple missing persons case began to shift. Julia was no longer just a kind-hearted woman who vanished. She was someone who had run before, someone who was cautious, someone who had prepared, and maybe someone who was fighting something bigger than herself. As part of their expanded investigation around the old Brookhaven site, police began speaking to people who were often overlooked. One of them was Malik Johnson, a 19-year-old who worked part-time at a repair shop about 3 miles from the abandoned facility. He lived with his grandmother in a small house on the outskirts of town. No one thought he'd know anything about Julia, but Malik came forward on his own after seeing images of Brookhaven on the local news. "I don't know if anyone's going to believe me," Malik said, eyes downcast, avoiding the investigator's gaze. "But I think I saw her." Malik recalled that about 3 days after Julia went missing, he was delivering tires to an old warehouse near Brookhaven's entrance when he saw a black woman standing just inside a chain-link fence. Her hair was disheveled. Her face was bruised. She looked straight at him, but didn't wave, didn't speak. She just stood there, like she knew that if she said something, it would make things worse. Malik said, his voice shaking. He didn't report it. Who's going to believe a black kid with no proof saying he saw a missing woman in a place nobody controls? Malik's story rocked the investigation. Officers escorted him to the area he described. He pointed to a wooden door hidden behind thick brush. The door was locked, with a new padlock, not one, left over from when the facility operated. They broke it open. Inside the dark room, there was no one, but flashlight beams revealed deep scratches in pizzazz. The wooden walls, like someone had once been, restrained there. Metal hooks, dried stains on the floor that couldn't be tested, and in the corner, a piece of earth-colored cotton fabric, the same color as the sweater Julia was last seen wearing. Malik's identity was protected as he had been a minor at the time, but what he shared changed the scope of the investigation. Police were no longer searching for a missing woman. They were tracking someone who had likely been held against her will and might have already been moved. Strangely, no utility records showed any active services at the Brookhaven site, but inside, it was clear someone had been living there recently. Then came a chilling twist. Traffic camera footage from a highway 10 miles from Brookhaven captured a black SUV leaving the area at 4:13 a.m., just 1 day after Malik shared his story. This time, the license plate was visible. When they ran it, the vehicle was registered to someone familiar, a senior administrative officer in the county office, the very person who had signed off on the sale of the Brookhaven facility 6 years earlier. A new link had surfaced, and now the questions no one dared ask were finally being spoken aloud. When the name of the new Brookhaven property owner surfaced, Ernest Claywell, many people in Maple Ridge couldn't believe their ears. Ernest, 52, was a quiet white man who had once worked as an administrative officer in the county office. He had retired early, citing health issues, lived alone on the outskirts of town. His home was tidy. He attended Sunday church, and he often showed up at local fundraisers. To most, Ernest was the kind of person you barely noticed in a crowd, polite, punctual, unremarkable. But property records showed he had purchased the Brookhaven site 6 years earlier through a shell company called Ashridge Holdings, a company with no website, no listed employees, and a registration address that matched a tiny postal box in the neighboring county. When questioned, Ernest initially denied everything, claimed he didn't know anything about Brookhaven, and hadn't been there since the center shut down. But when investigators showed him traffic cams, footage of his black SUV near Brookhaven at dawn, just 1 day after Malik came forward, his demeanor shifted. He didn't deny the car was his, but said, "Someone must have borrowed it, maybe a nephew who used to live with me." That explanation didn't hold. The nephew had moved out of state 2 years ago. More concerning, GPS data pulled from the vehicle's internal system showed the SUV stopping at Brookhaven for roughly an hour that night, then continuing south toward Bala, the Florida state line, along an area known for unmonitored backroads through the woods. Police obtained an emergency warrant to search Ernest's home. In his garage, they found a locked metal cabinet. Inside, old ID cards, photos of various women, and a collection of personal items, including a water-damaged purple notebook. On the cover was a floral emblem, the same symbol Julia used on her mental health blog. When compared with old photos, Julia's family confirmed it was hers. The same notebook she always kept with her, the one no one had ever seen in public. Ernest was taken into custody, and Maple Ridge was left reeling, not because people hadn't considered the possibility of foul play, but because the person behind it turned out to be someone so familiar, a former public official, a man with access to the kinds of details others overlook. And with that, a more disturbing question began to take shape. If Ernest had managed to keep Julia hidden all this time, had he really acted alone? News of Ernest Claywell's arrest sent shockwaves through Pierce County. Local headlines lit up with phrases like former county official named in missing persons case and the man no one suspected. But in the days that followed, as leaks from the investigation trickled out, an even darker truth began to emerge. Ernest hadn't acted alone. Inside Julia's purple notebook were scattered, shaky entries, clearly written in low light. One near the end read, "They won't let me sleep." I think there are 3 of them, one older, one with a northern accent, one they call Doc. Investigators cross-referenced names of former Brookhaven employees with Julia's entries, and one name came up repeatedly, Dr. Lionel Miles, the facility's former lead physician. His medical license had been suspended years ago over abuse allegations from former patients, but he was never formally charged due to lacks of evidence. Dr. Miles was now living in a small town 40 miles away where he operated until unregistered mental health recovery clinic under the radar. When police arrived, the clinic had already been cleared out. Locals said he had left 2 days earlier, retiring to Florida. A neighbor described him as extremely private, always wore gloves even when watering the garden. Simultaneously, GPS records from Ernest's vehicle revealed repeated trips to a stretch of woods west of Maple Ridge, mostly on Friday nights. Traffic cams showed a second vehicle often, appearing around the same time, a silver Dodge Rams pickup, license plate unreadable but marked with a star decal on the door. One investigator recognized the symbol. It belonged to a defunct private security group that once provided services for the county's civil rehab programs. A slow, creeping theory began to form. Maybe Julia hadn't been taken at random. Maybe she hadn't just vanished. Maybe she had stumbled into something far more sinister, a network, a system that once operated legally, one that went underground after being shut down, a system run by people who knew how to disappear from the records and how to use the law to hide what should be exposed. Now, the public wasn't just outraged, they were shaken, questioning everything they once trusted: medical, licenses, government titles, security agencies, even the very people once considered public servants. And in the midst of all that fear and suspicion, one question still remained, and it echoed louder than all the rest. Is Julia still alive? 6 weeks after Ernest Claywell's arrest, the investigation hit an unexpected low. No new leads, no sign of Julia. Dr. Lionel Miles was still missing, and despite mounting circumstantial evidence, there was nothing solid enough to bring formal kidnapping charges against anyone. The district attorney postponed Ernest's prosecution, citing a lack of direct evidence. Everything stalled. And in that silence, a deeper crisis began to grow, not just inside the investigation room, but in us, the hearts of people who had once believed in the system. A team of independent investigative journalists, known for covering missing persons cases in the Black community, stepped in. They combed through Brookhaven's archived records from the 1990s and found something that stopped even the police in their tracks. Over 8 years, of operation, the center had admitted more than 300 women under a program called coercive therapy, a court-ordered or guardian-enforced rehabilitation scheme. 17 of those women had no recorded discharge date, no release papers, no indication of where they went. When asked, the county claimed the records were lost in the 2005 flood. A convenient excuse. Too clean. Too easy to accept, except for one glaring detail. That year, there was no flood. More details began to surface. Malek, the teen who'd once seen Julia, mentioned something he'd been too scared to say before. Once, while near the abandoned facility, he heard a woman's voice call out the name Annika, that bought. Same name was first seen on the water bottle found in Julia's car, and again faintly scrawled on the back of her purple notebook. Annika, don't let them take you again. Police pulled up an old missing persons report from 2014. The victim, Annika Hill, 22 years old, last known to be undergoing treatment at Brookhaven. She vanished. Her family never got answers. A new, heartbreaking theory emerged, one that felt too painful to consider. What if Julia wasn't just taken? What if she went to Brookhaven on sound purpose? Because she knew something was still being hidden there? What if she had been investigating? What if she had known Annika? Or worse, what if she had once been a victim, herself, escaped, and returned to help someone else? But why and how? Those who love Julia now had to confront a terrifying possibility that they never truly knew who she was. Not because she lied, but because she had once belonged to a world too dangerous to speak about. A world where, if you survived, you were given two choices: stay silent or disappear. 2 months since Julia vanished. 6 weeks since all hope seemed to fade. Then, on a foggy October morning, a call came in to the investigator's private line. A woman's voice, hoarse, soft, crackled through the speaker. She's alive. But if you don't believe that, then you never understood her. Then silence. The call ended, untraceable. But it was enough to ignite something. Not hope, exactly. More like a refusal to let the story end. The very next day, as volunteers combed the lesser-checked western edge of the swamp near Brookhaven, they spotted something drifting in the water moss, a rusted keychain holding a photo of Julia and Amari at a county fair, a picture once, posted on Julia's blog. The keychain looked like it had been dropped, maybe in a struggle, maybe while running. But what mattered more, the mud on it was fresh. It hadn't been there long. No more than a week. Julia may have been there. She may still be. Search teams rushed to the area with dogs and thermal scanners. No sign of life. But in a decaying wooden shack, once a fire, Rangers Station, they found something that brought everyone to a standstill. A scrap of fabric tied to a tree branch, held in place by a hair clip. A small, simple hair clip. When handed the clip, Amari didn't hesitate. "That's my mom's," she said. Fingerprint analysis confirmed it, Julia's. It was the first confirmed physical evidence of Julia's presence in nearly 2 months. But the most painful part, that exact area had been requested for a search during the first week. It had been dismissed, labeled impractical, ignored. The system had once again overlooked the voices of ordinary people, trusted a map over a mother's, instinct, a community's warning. A tidal wave of frustration broke loose. Maple Ridge residents flooded the streets, not just for Julia, but for all the forgotten names. Buried in dusty files, Annika Hill, Tasha Red, Marlene Booker, each one marked case closed, but now they weren't just cases. They were human lives. And Julia, even in her absence, had lit something that refused to die. The silence would no longer be the ending. As night fell, Amari sat by the window, clutching her mother's hair clip. She turned to Lorna and asked, "Does Mom know I'm still waiting?" Lorna, voice breaking, could only whisper, "She knows. She's always known." It's been 431 days since the morning Julia Mays disappeared. Over a year since her car was found. Unlocked, phone still lit, and a water bottle labeled Annika tucked in the back. 18 months with no voice, no image, no goodbye, only silence, and a community that refuses to let go. Julia's case is no longer just a single missing persons report. It has become a symbol of what gets forgotten, of the missing Black women who aren't reported, aren't investigated, aren't asked about. In towns like Maple Ridge, where everyone knows each other by name, you'd think a disappearance would shake the whole world. But sometimes the most familiar faces are labeled as low risk, non-urgent, probably left on their own. That quiet, cruel assumption has gone on far too long. Julia left no note, no final message, but her path, from blogging about mental health to scattered entries in a water-damaged notebook to a muddy footprint on a car seat, painted a portrait no one could ignore. She wasn't perfect, but she never stayed silent in the face of injustice. She was a mother who didn't walk away from her child, a friend who never told the whole truth, but always left clues for those who dared to believe. At a candlelight vigil held near the swamp, where names of the missing were spoken aloud, Amarie stood next to a large photo of her mother, holding a sign in scribbled letters, "Mom's not home, but I'm still here." That one simple sentence, raw and heartbreaking, became the voice of a community learning how not to give up. No one knows for sure if Julia is still alive, but they know she fought. And somewhere, maybe, she's still fighting. In every dismissed testimony, in every redacted file, in the eyes of a little girl who still hasn't stopped hoping. There's no clear ending here, but maybe that's why the story still needs to be told again and again until silence is no longer the final word.